Can we control our futures? This has been a question for generations. How much of what occurs in our lives happens because we make the effort for it to occur, and how many things are out of our control? Does outlook on the situation affect the matter, or is it entirely based off external forces? It's a tough question because ideally the answer would be that your efforts would be directly correlated to the opportunities that you receive. This is most important in areas like our schools, like the classroom, where learning opportunities should not be limited to any race, gender, or background. This was not always the case, however. In the past, classrooms have been one of the most blatant examples of segregation throughout modern history. Yet with laws and social changes, we expect this to change. But has it? I want everyone to think of a moment. Let's say it's when you're in first grade, or second or third, or as far back as you remember. Was there any idea that you got during this time that has persisted? Were you told you had a good sense of music and now became a musician? Or have you been told that you are good at organizing, good at paying attention, and therefore carried those traits across the time since then to now, and now demonstrate some of the traits that you were once described with when you were young to the present day? I bet that many, at some point in your life, experienced this. Some teacher, some influence, some outside authority has told you a trait that you felt described yourself well, and thus carried on with it and lived a life in which you demonstrated that trait. This is called the self-fulfilling prophecy. And this is where I tell you that your entire future was determined by your first grade teacher. Now, this idea was proposed by psychologist Robert K. Merton in 1948 and primarily focused on the historical impacts of human expectations and their equivocal results. Now, why may this be the cause of troubles in places like schools? Well, in many recent longitudinal studies, it has been determined to have an effect on individuals, primarily when they are most malleable and impressionable during their early school years. So going back to the ideas presented by your teachers when you were young, what if these were not positive ideas? What if every day of the year by these teachers, you were told you lacked effort, you did not try anything, you lacked passion, you lacked any ambition whatsoever? What would be the outcome of this? Unfortunately, due to the self-fulfilling prophecy, this could lead you to develop some of these attributes, become lazy, and as you grow older, lack ambition. Though to many, this may seem like a non-issue. We already know that teachers hold a lot of power over the development of children, so there are many rules in place and laws that should prevent discrimination. Yet this is untrue. And this is unfortunately one of the reasons that there may be inherent biases and modern day stigmatization of certain groups of people. In 2012, a study by Tasha Riley and Charles Ungerleider in Canada touched upon the bias faced by Aboriginal students as well as those with English as a second language. A group of volunteer teachers were tasked with determining the classes that 24 grade 7 students would end up in, based solely on their grade, which they were given in a report. This group of 24 students were made up of three groups: Aboriginals, English second language, and typical students. What they found was interesting. Out of 21 teachers, the number that arranged the students without bias purely off the grades were one. Only one of those teachers designated the proper courses based on their grades. Additionally, on average, when teachers had a female student who had the same academic performances as their male counterpart, they promoted the female student into accelerated courses far more often than the male. Now, these teachers most definitely had mental sets and heuristics of what each group were as students. They may have had a bad Aboriginal student in the past, or they may have found that generally girls perform better in accelerated courses. However, this does not change the fact that their influence over these decisions could result in a long path of self-fulfilling demise. And this comes to the final question: how do we avoid this? Now, there are two types of mentalities when it comes to how one views the world. When something bad happens, someone may curse their bad luck, they may blame it on an external force, they may talk about how someone had wronged them in the past. And this is an external locus of control, belief that outside factors primarily affect what the outcome of one's life is. Another person may take responsibility for whatever happened and focus on what they themselves could have done differently. This represents the internal locus of control. And those with an internal locus of control are much less likely to develop a situation where they are negatively influenced by the biases or misrepresentations of teachers. Additionally, having high belief in one's own ability, otherwise known as self-efficacy, through high self-efficacy, one can block unwarranted self-criticism. This is illustrated in another study in 2004 by Elizabeth Henriksen and Anne Margaret Rydell, focused on the teacher relations and the self-perceptions of children with externalizing and internalizing behavior problems. They concluded that research demonstrates children with externalizing behavior problems constitute a risk to the school, specifically in regards to teaching interactions. Negative and conflicting behavior leads to maladaptation. An interesting conclusion they made that while students with internalized behavior at first had a non-optimal relationship with the teachers, they eventually adapted well and were able to succeed, implying that those with an externalized behavior issues would deal with more issues compared to those with those internalized issues. The students that had internalized behavior maintained their issues to themselves and did not lash out to the teachers, blaming them. Instead, they demonstrated an internal locus of control and eventually dealt with the issues far better than those that lashed out against the teachers, externalizing their anger as they possibly had an external locus of control, meaning they were less likely to internalize the issues and take personal responsibility and more likely to project them or blame others for them for their own misfortune. However, most of us do not rely purely off of external or internal locuses of control. In fact, some good news is that most of us rely on some form of an internal locus of control. The only issue is that we attribute positive results to that internal locus of control and instead relate negative results with external factors. And this develops into practically the same situation as one with external locuses of control deal with. This is known as self-attribution theory. And to avoid it, we must acknowledge that our own parts within some situations may have affected the outcome, whether it be negative or positive, and accept it the same either way. As for teachers, bias is inherent and not necessarily evil in all cases, so it does not need to be abolished. Rather, it is important to acknowledge that each individual student is their own person. Avoiding grouping people in certain groups based off specific attributes or backgrounds would be beneficial greatly. Finally, to go back to our original question, did your first grade teacher really determine your whole future? Well, probably not, but they did certainly influence it. The amount that all your teachers influence your life, however, is up to you. So how much do we control our future? As much as we believe we can. Thank you.